I discovered my wife's secret. She was seeing the man I introduced her to. I've always believed life has a rhythm. Not just in music, but in the way people move, the way a room breathes when it's filled with laughter, the pause between one thought and the next. For the last 15 years, Laura and I had a rhythm. It wasn't perfect. No marriage is, but it was ours. We had rituals. Sunday brunch with the same cafe order every time. Rainy evenings wrapped in blankets with that terrible detective show she loved. Her teasing me for humming while I graded student work. Small things. Familiar beats. A song I knew by heart. Lately, though, something's off. Not missing. Not broken. Just misaligned. Like a note held too long in a familiar tune. Slight enough that most people wouldn't hear it. But I do. It started with timing. Laura's always been precise about her mornings. Up at 7:15, coffee at 7:25, out the door at 8:05 sharp. I used to joke that her routine was more reliable than my metronome. But over the past few weeks, she's been leaving earlier. 10, sometimes 15 minutes. No explanation. Just a rushed kiss on the cheek and a tossed "see you tonight," half shouted as the front door shuts behind her. I asked once, just casually, if something had changed at work. She smiled like nothing was different. New client, she said. Longer drive. Then she changed the subject to a news story I'd already told her about the day before. It was such a small thing, but something in her tone, too upbeat, too fluid, felt rehearsed. Not dishonest exactly, just polished. Then there's the coat. Last winter, she bought a red wool coat on impulse. Said it made her feel too loud. She wore it once to a friend's party, got self-conscious, and hung in the back of the closet. But now, in the last 2 weeks, it's become her favorite. I see it draped over the arm of the couch when she gets home, or hanging neatly on the back of her chair at dinner. That coat, it's not for work. It's for being seen. It's not just what she wears. It's the little improvisations to her usual melody. The time she comes home smelling faintly of cologne I don't own. Or when she answers a simple question with a pause that stretches just a beat too long. I asked how her meeting went last Thursday. She blinked, smiled, said, "Which one?" Her voice climbed up at the end, like a question inside a question. These aren't confessions, not even clues, but they're off, and I hear them all. I used to play a game with my students, have them close their eyes while I changed one note in a simple progression. Most couldn't tell, but some would tilt their heads, frown slightly. It sounded different, they'd say. Couldn't explain why. Just knew. That's where I am now. I can't explain it, but I know. Last Sunday, I stayed late after a student recital to help break down equipment. I walked home through the Pearl District, longer route, but I needed the air. The rain had finally stopped. The pavement shimmered under the streetlights, and my thoughts played in loops. Then I saw it. Laura's car, parked in front of a cafe we used to go to when we were dating. She said it was too noisy for client meetings, hadn't been there in years. But there it was, silver and unmistakable, idling in a loading zone. I slowed my pace. The front windows were steamed from the inside, but I could make out silhouettes. Laura was at a corner table, laughing, head tilted slightly toward a man I didn't recognize. Tall, trim beard, dress shirt without a tie. His body language, casual but close. One hand resting near hers. The kind of easy familiarity that doesn't come from a business lunch. I stood across the street, pretending to check my phone. But I wasn't checking anything. I was just listening to the faint clatter of cups, to her laugh, lighter than I'd heard in weeks, to the silence between them, which somehow spoke louder than any word. I didn't confront her. I didn't barge in. That's not who I am. Instead, I walked home, in the quiet. The rain started again halfway there, gentle, almost hesitant, tapping against my coat like it wasn't sure if it was welcome. I kept hearing that laugh in my head, replaying it, slowing it down like a recording I couldn't stop analyzing. When I got home, Laura was already there. Hair damp, coat hung, socks off like she'd been back for hours. "You're late," she said. "Got caught up helping a student," I replied. She smiled. I kissed her on the forehead. She smelled like rain and lavender soap. And something else. Something fainter. Like aftershave I didn't recognize. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about how many times I'd ignored moments like this. Told myself I was being paranoid. Told myself love was louder than suspicion. But now I wasn't sure if I was listening to the right melody or trying to remember a song that had already ended. I met Ellen, my sister, the next morning. We sat at a small table tucked in the corner of a bakery we used to go to as kids. The smell of rising dough and burnt sugar filled the air. "I think something's wrong," I said, stirring my coffee without drinking it. Ellen raised an eyebrow. "With Laura?" I nodded. "She's distant, but not in the usual way. She's still kind, still says all the right things. But the rhythm's wrong." She gave me a look. "You're talking like a composer again. It's the only way I know how to explain it." I hesitated. I think she might be seeing someone. Ellen didn't flinch, just tilted her head and waited. "She's not careless. That's what scares me. There's no drama, no slip-ups, just little things. And I'm not even sure I'm not imagining them." Ellen reached over and covered my hand with hers. "You've always known how to hear what others miss. Maybe it's time to trust that instinct." I looked at her, and for a second, I felt 10 years old again, trying to figure out how to play my first piece while she sat beside me, cheering me on, even when I fumbled. "Just be sure," she added. "And whatever you find, don't let it rewrite who you are." That night, I heard Laura humming again. A melody I didn't recognize, drifting through the hallway as she folded laundry in the next room. I stood in the kitchen, lights off, listening to every note. Not because I liked the tune, but because I knew, deep down, it wasn't meant for me. And for the first time, I started to wonder how long she'd been composing this other life. How many verses I'd missed while trying to keep ours in tune. I never went looking for proof. Not really. Some part of me still wanted to believe I was wrong, that I'd misread a moment, misheard a tone, mistimed a rhythm. That maybe Laura's new energy, her distant warmth, was just a phase we'd weather like we always had. After all, 15 years of marriage doesn't fall apart over a red coat and a change commute. But truth has its own tempo, and once it starts, it doesn't wait for you to be ready. It was a Saturday morning, gray and slow. I was organizing old sheet music in my study, something to keep my hands busy. The house was quiet. Laura had gone out for a strategy brunch, whatever that meant. She'd mentioned it the night before while brushing her hair, not looking at me. I was flipping through a folder marked Winter Recital 2017 when I came across a photo tucked between the pages. Us, at the community gala, arms around each other, laughing. She was wearing the necklace I gave her for our 10th anniversary. A delicate silver chain with a treble clef pendant. She called it her everyday charm, said it reminded her of me. I hadn't seen it in months. And then I remembered, last week, when I'd bumped into her by the laundry room, she was just coming home. She bent to untie her boots, and as she turned, I noticed something glint beneath her collar. A quick flash. That necklace. It had struck me as odd, not because she wore it, but because she wasn't supposed to be wearing it. At least not for work. She always said it was too sentimental, too delicate for the office. I don't know what made me do it. Call it instinct, or maybe just a need to stop guessing. I went to the piano bench, her catch-all for keys, gloves, anything she didn't want to carry upstairs. There, half buried under a scarf, was her day planner. A real one, leather-bound. Laura always said she didn't trust digital calendars. I opened it slowly. Each page had her careful, looping script. Meetings, reminders, lunches. Most were work-related, until Thursday. 2 p.m., D at Lucille's. Not a client meeting. No company initials. Just D. Lucille's was that tucked-away restaurant we used to go to for special occasions. Intimate. Off the beaten path. Romantic in the quiet way we both liked. I felt my stomach tighten. There were more. Scattered across other days. D walk. D matinee. Every entry was vague, but regular. Intentional. The planner trembled in my hands. Not from rage. From clarity. I sat down at the piano, closed the lid, rested my hands on the smooth wood. My breath came shallow, but steady. I knew I didn't need more. But fate, or cruelty, gave me more anyway. Later that day, while putting away laundry, I noticed Laura's coat. The coat, hanging over the back of a chair. I reached into the pocket without thinking, looking for her gloves. What I found instead was a small white card. Lucille's. A reservation confirmation. Yesterday's date. Table for two. The name scribbled on the back in ballpoint ink stopped me cold. David K. David Kessler. It hit me like a dissonant chord. Sudden, jarring wrong. David and I had gone to school together, both music majors. He'd moved to the East Coast, worked with orchestras, did some guest conducting. He came back into my life last year when I invited him to give a talk at the Academy. Laura was there that night in the front row, eyes bright. Said David was charming, brilliant, funny. I introduced them. I'd invited him into our lives. The card slid from my hand and landed on the hardwood floor with a soft, flat sound. I stared at it as if it had something else to say. It didn't. I stood at the kitchen sink for a long time, hands braced on either side. The house felt hollow. Even the ticking of the wall clock sounded uncertain, like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. I thought of all the times Laura had sat beside me at recitals, eyes closed, swaying gently to the music. The way she'd squeeze my hand during crescendos. I thought of our anniversary trip to Ashland when we danced awkwardly in a little vineyard courtyard, barefoot, slightly tipsy, laughing. Were those memories real? Or were they just notes on a page, played one way when written, now twisted into a minor key? I let myself cry quietly. No gasps, no shaking. Just a slow leak of something I didn't have a name for. A kind of mourning. But eventually the tears stopped, and I stood up straighter. This wasn't a performance. I wasn't going to crumble for someone else's applause. I wiped my face with the edge of my sleeve and turned off the kitchen light. The house dimmed to soft shadows. In that half-light, I felt something settle. Not peace. Not yet. But intention. I wasn't going to confront her now. Not in the middle of a Saturday afternoon. Not without thinking. But I knew the truth. And the truth was enough for now. That evening, as Laura chatted in the kitchen about a colleague's engagement, I watched her. Not in suspicion. Not in anger. Just watched. She moved like she always had. Knew where everything was. Told stories with too much detail. Laughed in the right places. If I hadn't found that card, I would have never guessed. That's what scared me the most. Later, in the quiet of my study, I opened a blank sheet of music paper. I didn't write anything. Just sat there. Sometimes you have to let the silence stretch long enough to hear what needs to come next. And then the thought came. If she could rewrite the truth in secret, so could I, in the open. That's when I knew. I would confront her. Not for revenge. Not for drama. For something much more powerful. Clarity. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that made you hear things you normally wouldn't. The creak of the floor near the fireplace. The soft settling of the walls. I had chosen the living room for this, not out of strategy, but because it felt honest. Familiar. It was the room where we'd exchanged Christmas gifts and burned dinners, where we danced once, barefoot on hardwood, to a jazz record that skipped every fifth beat. Now the only music was the rain outside, ticking against the windows like a metronome running just a hair too fast. Laura came in from the kitchen with 2 mugs of tea. Chamomile. I hadn't asked for any. She handed one to me and sat across the room, legs tucked under her, like nothing in the world was wrong. I watched her for a moment. How easily she folded into comfort. How practiced it looked now. Lucille's, I said. Just the word. Like a test note. She froze, the cup halfway to her lips. I used to think it was ours, I added. But I found a reservation card in your coat. Her eyes didn't widen. No gasp. Just a slow, careful blink. Then she set the mug down on the side table and looked at me fully. Daniel, you were the necklace I gave you, I continued. For him. I let the words hang there. No shouting. No theatrics. Just the truth stripped bare. She inhaled sharply, but not with surprise. More like resignation. It wasn't meant to, she began. Wasn't meant to what? I asked, my voice steady. Happen? Hurt me? Rewrite 15 years. She pressed her palms together, rubbed them slowly. It started months ago. I didn't plan it. It just happened. I looked at her then, really looked. She was still the woman I married. Still had that small scar above her right eyebrow from when she slipped on wet tile during our honeymoon. But something behind her eyes had shifted. Some door had closed and locked itself. You said he was brilliant, I murmured. The night of the recital, you sat in the front row and said he made music feel alive again. I meant it, she said, her voice thin. And you've been so distant. You live in your world of notes and lessons, and sometimes I felt like a ghost in our house. I let that sink in, not because I agreed, but because it was hers. Her version, her song. You know what's strange? I said, I never stopped noticing you. I noticed when you hummed songs I'd never heard. I noticed when you started leaving early, when you stopped telling me the little things. I noticed when you put on that coat. Laura looked down at her hands. I didn't mean to fall for him. But you did. She nodded just once. I'm sorry. And there it was. 2 words that should have meant everything, and somehow meant nothing at all. The silence stretched, tense and buzzing, until the doorbell rang. I blinked. She looked at me. Are you expecting someone? No. I walked to the door, unsure whether I hoped for a neighbor, a package, a godsend. Instead, it was Ellen, my sister, holding a book I'd lent her weeks ago. Her eyes met mine, instantly registering the tension in the air. She looked past me and saw Laura on the couch. I didn't mean to interrupt, she said. It's okay. I replied, though it wasn't. Not a great time. She nodded, held the book out. I took it with one hand. You good? She asked quietly. I hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, I'm getting there. After she left, I closed the door and leaned against it, my back to the wood. I felt old, heavy, like every memory in this house had suddenly been put on trial. Laura stood up. Do you want to tell people? Her question caught me off guard. What? Do you want to tell our friends? Our families? Do you want to burn it all down? I walked slowly back into the room, sat on the edge of the piano bench. No, I said, I don't want a spectacle. I don't want to explain to people who'll only take sides. Then what do you want? That was the question, wasn't it? I looked up at the painting above the fireplace. We bought it together at a street fair, an abstract swirl of blues and golds. She said it reminded her of sound waves. I said it reminded me of her laugh. I want to remember who I was before this, I said, and I want to live like I still believe in that version of myself. She crossed her arms. So that's it. No, this is the part where we start being honest. With each other. With ourselves. She didn't respond. Just stared at the floor. Lost in a silence she couldn't explain away. I don't hate you, Laura, I said. But I can't keep pretending we're still in the same song. She looked up, eyes glistening. You still talk in music. It's the only language I trust. She turned away then, brushing her sleeve across her face. I didn't follow. I stayed on the bench, hands folded in my lap like a student waiting for a lesson to end. That night, I lay in our bed and watched the shadows shift across the ceiling. One truth had been spoken, but others waited, unspoken, unresolved. The hardest part wasn't hearing the lie. It was accepting that the harmony we built together had been quietly broken long before the first note went wrong. And now I had to decide, do I stay and try to fix a melody that no longer fits? Or do I walk away and begin a new composition? The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Not by alarm, by the stillness. That strange, dense quiet that feels like the whole house is holding its breath. I slipped out of bed without waking Laura. She was curled toward the window, hair scattered across the pillow like she hadn't moved all night. Or maybe, like me, she hadn't slept at all. Downstairs, the air was cooler, the kind of chill that seeps in through the floorboards and clings to your spine. I made coffee, black, too strong, and sat on the piano bench without lifting the lid. The scent of roasted beans filled the room, but I barely tasted it. The keys stared back at me like unopened letters. The confrontation had been clean. No shouting, no plates thrown, but the silence that followed was jagged, full of things left unsaid. It was like hearing a song abruptly end mid-measure. No closure, just absence. I wanted to believe I'd feel anger, a righteous, purifying kind. But what settled inside me was something else, grief. Not just for the betrayal, but for everything that had once made sense. Laura and I had built a life note by note. Inside jokes, weekend drives, whispered dreams that never made it to paper. Now all of it felt like a draft that had been edited behind my back. I sat there a long time, hands on my knees, staring at the floorboards. I kept thinking about that necklace, the treble clef she wore for him. It wasn't just jewelry. It was us, our story, wrapped around her neck, worn for another man. How do you reclaim something like that? By midday, I couldn't stand the stillness anymore. I called Ellen, asked if she could meet me at Selwood Park. No questions, just I'll be there in 20. It was overcast, the sky hung low and pale. The Willamette River moved slow beside us, the water a dull green, flat and heavy with spring melt. We walked without talking for a while, boots crunching on gravel, the breeze tugging at our jackets. "You look like you haven't slept," she said eventually. "I haven't." I kicked a pine cone into the brush. "It's over. I'm sure of it now." She nodded but didn't say, "I told you so." That's why I'd called her. "I keep wondering," I said, "how much of what we had was real. If she could go behind my back so easily, was any of it solid?" She stopped walking, looked out over the water. "I asked myself the same thing once," she said. "When Greg left me, I kept replaying our good years like they were evidence in a trial. But memory doesn't lie, Dan. People change. Choices don't erase the past. They just rewrite the ending." I looked at her. "So what did you do?" "I stopped trying to salvage the script," she said, "and started writing my own." We kept walking. Ducks drifted in a half circle by the shore. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed, but the sound felt miles away. "You think I'm making a mistake if I walk away?" I asked. "I think you'd be making a bigger one if you stayed, just to prove you're not broken." That stuck. It sank into the silence between us like a stone dropped into still water. Back home, Laura was on a video call in the dining room. Her voice was professional, composed. I didn't interrupt. Instead, I went upstairs and opened the closet, pulled out a suitcase. Not as a threat, not a drama, just as a step, a punctuation mark. I packed what mattered, clothes, books, my teaching scores. I wrapped my metronome in a towel, laid it carefully beside my old conductor's baton, and then I walked downstairs, set the suitcase near the door, and waited for her to finish the call. She saw it before I said a word. "You're leaving," she said. I nodded. "Is this permanent?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked around the room. The framed photo of us at Crater Lake. The bookshelf we built together, uneven but sturdy. The piano, silent but present. All of it part of a life I'd loved. Still loved in a way, but no longer belonged to. "I'm not leaving to punish you," I said. "I'm leaving because staying would punish me." She flinched just slightly. "So that's it?" "No," I said. "This is the part where I find out who I am without all the noise." She looked like she wanted to say something else. But whatever it was, she kept it. I walked out into the late afternoon gray, suitcase rolling behind me like a soft percussion. The scent of rain still lingered in the air, sweet and metallic. That night, in the quiet of my new apartment, bare walls, one lamp, and a mattress on the floor, I sat at the small keyboard I'd brought with me. No expectations, no audience. I touched a single key, G, then another, C, and slowly, tentatively, I began to play, not because I had a song, but because I needed to remember that I could still create one. I don't know what comes next. The paperwork, the conversations, the unraveling of a life tied in legal knots. But for now, I know this. I made a choice. Not out of pride, out of clarity. And sometimes, that's the only harmony you can hope for. The first week alone felt like a long, unfinished chord, held just slightly too long vibrating with questions. The apartment was small, sparse. A second-story walk-up with cracked molding and a heater that made a sound like distant applause when it kicked on. I chose it for one reason. It had a south-facing window and enough room for my keyboard. Every morning, I made coffee too strong and drank it too fast. The scent filled the whole place, clinging to the blinds and the old floorboards. I'd open the window just to let the outside in, fresh air, traffic hum, the distant clang of the light rail downtown. It was strange having no one to speak to at breakfast, no one to tell that I'd oversteeped the tea or burned the toast again. I caught myself reaching for 2 mugs more than once. But silence can be restorative, too, if you let it. I started teaching extra lessons, late evenings at the music school, weekend group classes for adults picking up piano for the first time. There was something comforting about it, watching people fumble and grin, watching them get better. I could see myself in them, tentative, out of rhythm, but willing. Then came the choir. I hadn't sung in years, not since college. But when a fellow instructor invited me to join the Portland Community Chorale, I said yes without thinking. The first rehearsal was rough. My voice cracked halfway through a warm-up. My sheet music felt like a stranger's handwriting. But something in me opened during those harmonies, standing among 50 others, breathing the same beat, voices folding into something larger than the sum of us. That first night, walking home under the amber street lamps, I realized I wasn't rebuilding my old life. I was composing a new one. Still, healing isn't a clean arc. There were nights I sat in the apartment, back against the wall, scrolling through old photos I swore I deleted. I'd watch a 5-second video of Laura laughing in the passenger seat, sunlight streaking her face, and feel something twist in my chest. Grief, nostalgia, maybe just habit. I let it come. I didn't try to mute it. But the next morning, I'd get up, make coffee, and go back to work. 3 months in, I had my first real test. The choir had a spring concert at a community arts festival downtown. It was packed, families, tourists, colleagues. We were warming up backstage when I saw her. Laura. She was standing near one of the pop-up booths, talking to someone. And beside her, hands in his pockets, was David Kessler. My chest tightened, but I kept moving. I didn't freeze. I didn't leave. I walked onto the stage with my folder in hand and took my place in the second row. As we sang, I saw them in the crowd. Laura's face was composed, but her eyes flicked toward me, just once. David looked anywhere but the stage. It wasn't triumph I felt, not anger. It was clarity. When my solo came, I stepped forward. The lights were hot on my face. The hall hushed. I sang. Not perfectly, my voice caught at one point. But it was mine, and the moment belonged to no one else. Afterward, the applause felt like something I hadn't heard in years. Affirmation. Not from others. From myself. This is my song now, I said to Ellen, who hugged me afterward. No one else gets to write it. Back at the apartment that night, I started a new piece. Not a sad one. Something light, layered, half memory, half possibility. I named it Resonance. Each note felt like a step forward, not erasing what had come before, but rising from it. I still kept the treble clef pendant, tucked in a drawer with old recital programs. Not as a wound, as a reminder. People ask if I'll ever date again, if I'm open to that chapter. And I am, but not yet. First, I want to know who I am without the echo of someone else's approval. First, I want to build something solid beneath my feet. One morning, a student of mine, a quiet, thoughtful teenage boy named Eli, stayed after class. He played through a composition I hadn't assigned, something he'd written himself. It was simple but raw, real. Is it any good? He asked. I smiled. It doesn't have to be good yet. It just has to be true. He nodded. I watched him pack up, saw something in his posture shift, a confidence forming, and I realized that's what I'd been doing all along. Not performing, not proving, returning to what was true. I've come a long way. I'm not whole yet, but wholeness was never the goal. Clarity was. Agency. Freedom. And now, months after walking out with a single suitcase and a frayed heart, I can sit at the piano, play something new, and not feel like I'm lying to myself. The past still visits, but it no longer lingers. Just last week, a colleague mentioned something about Laura. A passing comment. Did you hear? Sounds like things with her and David aren't going so well. I didn't ask for details. Didn't need them. But the word stuck in my head like the first line of a new refrain. 2 years later, my mornings are quieter, but not empty. The apartment has changed since those first restless nights. The walls now hold framed sketches by students, a shelf of music theory books, a record player that clicks softly before each side begins. A tall philodendron leans toward the morning light, always a little dramatic about where the sun is. Most days, I sit by the window with my coffee and watch the world rise. Street sweepers humming, storefronts yawning open, distant violinists warming up down the block. The rhythms of a city, imperfect but honest. My kind of music. My life isn't what I imagined back then. It's better because it's mine. The composition I began that first spring, Resonance, was performed last fall by a chamber ensemble. A small venue, just 60 seats, but everyone was filled. People told me, afterward, they felt something they couldn't quite name in it. I smiled, thanked them, and didn't try to explain. It wasn't about explaining anymore. It was about being. News of Laura came from a mutual friend, a former colleague of hers who also took adult piano lessons with me on Tuesdays. We were talking about music, about how people change when they play. She paused mid-conversation, stirred her tea slowly, then said, I ran into Laura recently. She's not doing so well. I stayed quiet. She continued gently. The guy she left you for? He left. Moved back east. Apparently, it wasn't as glamorous as she expected. She lost a couple clients, took on debt. I think she even sold some jewelry. The words sat in the room like dust motes, slow and harmless until they settled. It didn't sting like I thought it would, but it did echo. Later that night, curiosity nudged me, just once. I searched her name and found a profile on a professional directory. No photo, fewer credentials than I remembered. At the bottom, a single review, unresponsive, unreliable. I closed the tab without reading more. What surprised me most was how little I needed that closure anymore. I'd already built mine. I'd found community in the strangest places, among retirees relearning piano, teenagers composing angsty etudes, neighbors who knocked on my door just to say, that sounded beautiful, by the way. Music had become what it always should have been. Not a bridge to someone else's heart, but a mirror for my own. And then came the necklace. I was helping a former student prepare for a move, organizing donations from old drawers and boxes. We laughed over forgotten trinkets and dried pens. At the bottom of one jewelry box, wrapped in a velvet pouch, was the treble clef pendant. My breath caught. It was unmistakable. My student saw my face and offered it. It was in a donation pile, she said. You want it? I turned it over in my hand. The chain was slightly tarnished. The charm dull, but intact. It felt smaller than I remembered. I didn't take it. Instead, I left it there, nestled among mismatched earrings and unused watches. Whatever meaning it once carried, I'd already reclaimed. A few weeks ago, I saw Laura in person, at the library of all places. I was leading a community workshop on writing music for film. She was standing near the back shelves, holding a book on creative marketing, thin and unread. She didn't notice me at first. I watched her for a moment, not out of bitterness, not with judgment, just recognition. She looked different, not worn exactly, just muted, a little like someone trying to hum along to a song they didn't know anymore. Eventually, she saw me. Our eyes met. I gave a nod, a small one. She smiled, tight, tired, and left without a word. And that was enough. Later that evening, I sat down at my piano. The air smelled faintly of rain and warm wood polish. My fingers hovered above the keys, and I let them find something new, a phrase I hadn't written before. Playful, quiet, undecided. Halfway through, I paused and whispered to no one. Betrayal broke my song, but I wrote a new one. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it wasn't the end of something. It was the theme, the thread that had carried me through grief, past anger, beyond shame, into something clearer, more honest. I don't tell people everything that happened. Some things I keep tucked away in measures and rests, in the space between one note and the next. But if you listen closely, you'll hear it. Not the pain, the resilience. Tonight, the recital hall is full. A new piece premieres, Clarity in D minor. It's not about her. It's not about me. It's about what comes after the silence. As the lights dim, I take my seat. The conductor raises her baton, and I smile, because some endings aren't endings at all. They're just the first note of something entirely new.